My parents kicked me out at 18 and I ended up homeless on the streets. 10 years later, they lost everything and broke into my house to squat in it, but life is never fair. I'm 30 now, male, and my parents never wanted children in the first place. I was an only child, basically an accident according to what relatives have told me. My parents had sworn they'd never have kids when they got married. My early childhood was okay, but once I grew out of the cute toddler phase, they lost all interest in spending time with me. Both worked full-time running their own business, which was their entire life. I was always an afterthought. The rest of the family, grandparents and such, lived far away and I barely knew them until I was an adult. So I had no close relatives nearby growing up. Television and my teachers basically raised me. By the time I hit my teens, I often spent birthdays alone because they'd just hand me money and tell me to buy whatever I wanted. Christmas and even back-to-school shopping were the same. We wouldn't even have had a Christmas tree after I turned 10 if I hadn't begged them to buy a fake one I could put up and take down myself. If I had to describe my parents, picture the kind of people who always dress in black, drink expensive wine, and look down on everyone else. The last time I saw them, they still looked and acted exactly the same, except my dad was now wearing an obvious toupee. At 16, I asked if I could work part-time at their business and they said there were no openings, which was just their way of saying they didn't want me there. The day I turned 18, they told me I was an adult now and they expected me gone as soon as possible. I was still in high school and working part-time with nowhere near enough saved for college. Right after graduation, they handed me a formal 30-day eviction notice and told me to pack my bags. They didn't even help me move. I had to beg a friend's dad with a truck for help. I ended up in a terrible apartment, working retail with no real-life experience and no chance to go to college. A few months later, I got fired because the manager hated me and wrote me up for ridiculous things. I don't even remember what they were, but I wasn't the only one he targeted. Enough people complained that the company investigated and fired him, apparently for stealing cigarettes, among other things, but they refused to rehire me and only changed my record from terminated to laid off, so my resume wouldn't look bad. I burned through my savings fast because I was terrible with money and couldn't find steady work, so I lost the apartment. I went back to my parents begging for help and they refused to let me stay even temporarily. I ended up homeless, living in a tent in someone's backyard through winter. All my friends had gone off to college, some out of state, and I was just a broke kid scraping by. My salvation came when a neighbor of my parents found out I was camping out and offered me a room so I wouldn't freeze, then helped me pressure my parents into giving me contact info for the rest of the family. They only gave it up because they were afraid of being judged for throwing their own son out. Then they told me never to bother them again. I called my paternal grandparents. They were shocked and thrilled since they hadn't seen me since I was a baby and I'm their only grandchild. As soon as they heard what happened, they flew me out and basically adopted me. My parents didn't even show up to say goodbye at the airport despite being invited. I had no contact with them for almost a decade. My grandparents despised them for how they treated me and legally disinherited them, cutting them out of the will entirely. My parents were furious but claimed they didn't care because they were doing fine without the inheritance. That turned out to be very wrong. After a year living with my grandparents, I was able to start community college, earned an associate's degree, got a decent job through my grandfather's recommendation, and eventually my grandparents offered to sell me their house so they could retire to Arizona. My grandmother's health was suffering in the cold winters. I was sad to see them go but happily bought the house for a third of its value and will have it paid off in a few more years. My job requires periodic travel, so I'm away for weeks at a time, which I don't mind. I have no pets or girlfriend right now, simply no time, but in a few years when things settle I plan to change that. I don't want to be alone forever. Then one day in late 2020 I came home after being away over 2 weeks to find an unfamiliar white van in my driveway with my parents' old business logo on the side. My stomach dropped. They had broken in somehow and were living in my house. They greeted me like we were old buddies. I told them to get out and they refused, claiming it was still their parents' house. I explained it was legally mine. They would have known that if they'd stayed in my life after throwing me to the wolves with zero life experience a decade earlier. We argued, they still wouldn't leave. My father insisted it was originally his parents' house, so he had every right to stay. I locked myself in my room and called the police. When the cops arrived, they were useless. My parents lied and said they'd been living there long enough to establish residency and even claimed we had a verbal lease agreement. I had no cameras to prove otherwise, neighbors had none either, so it was my word against theirs. The police called it a family dispute and told me to file for eviction in court. This was 2020, so everything was delayed because of the pandemic. Meanwhile, my parents lived rent-free, rubbing it in my face. From what I could get out of them, their business had collapsed, they sold almost everything to pay debts, and only had the van and some personal items left. They planned to stay indefinitely. They quickly found new jobs, dad delivering packages, mom retail, and earned money but only contributed about $100 a month toward utilities, acting like I should be grateful. Whenever I brought up real rent, they said I owed them free housing for stealing 18 years of their lives. They threatened to stop paying utilities altogether. Desperate, I called my grandparents. They were furious, but my parents still refused to budge. My grandfather apologized for ever selling me the house, worried it made the invasion possible. I told him not to worry. I'd already filed for eviction and made sure my parents knew they were on borrowed time. After 4 months, in early 2021, we finally went to court. They fought the eviction, trying to use the grandparents' former ownership and their $100 payments as proof of tenancy, but there was no written lease and they were smart enough not to forge one. The judge ruled they had zero rights and gave them 30 days to leave. Afterward, they told me they were disappointed I'd throw out my own blood. I laughed and called them hypocrites. They'd done exactly that to me without a thought for my well-being. They never loved me, so I felt nothing for them. I told them straight to their faces they were narcissistic, stuck-up liars who had no right to call themselves my parents because they never acted like it, and to get their affairs in order because I wouldn't hesitate to call the police again after the 30 days. My father looked ready to explode, but my mother grabbed his shoulder, shook her head, gave me a hateful look, and they walked away. That final month they alternated between guilt-tripping me and ignoring me completely. I hung a big calendar in the living room and marked off each remaining day in red, circling March 2nd in a huge red ring. They waited until the absolute last day to move out, even though they'd been sleeping on the guest room floor for days after packing. They were so sure they could force me to let them stay that they hadn't bothered looking for a place until the eviction was final. They ended up in a tiny, disgusting studio in the next town over, walls painted vomit green, 20-year-old carpet, one window facing a brick wall, no dishwasher, microscopic kitchen, filthy toilet, paper-thin walls with neighbors screaming constantly. My mother kept giving me sad looks, hinting I should feel guilty for forcing them into it, but I ignored her. They begged for the guest room queen bed, dresser, and flat-screen TV. I told them to take the damn things because I never wanted to see them in my house again. The moment they were gone for good, I changed every exterior lock. They watched me install the new front door hardware from the van, said nothing, and finally drove away. I breathed a huge sigh of relief, thinking karma had finally caught up and they could rot for all I cared. But no. Recently my grandparents heard from them bragging about a new, similar business in my state and how they're basically back where they were pre-pandemic, making good money and looking down on everyone again. I googled it, lots of positive reviews, seems legitimate. I'm honestly bitter. They put me through homelessness, squatted in my house for months, and now they're back to being wine-sniffing snobs. If karma exists, it's taking its sweet time. Edit. Thanks for all the constructive advice. A lot of you pointed out selling the house might be smart, and I'm seriously considering it. I asked my grandparents. They said if I want to sell and move closer to them, go for it. My parents won't know where I am. I'm looking into whether my company can transfer me south. I'd love warmer winters anyway after that tent experience. And since I don't have many friends here and didn't grow up in this house, starting over wouldn't be hard. I'll add more cameras either way. For those wondering how they got in and fooled the police, they climbed through an unlocked window, removed the screen, found my spare keys hanging in the kitchen, made copies, changed their address at the DMV to mine, and showed the printout to police claiming I'd given permission weeks earlier. They also forwarded their mail. Without proof of exactly when they entered, police treated it as a civil matter and made me go through full eviction. I refused to give them the Wi-Fi password the whole time. They used mobile hotspots instead. I'm not going to leave bad reviews or dig into their past. It's not worth it. I'll just take the high road and forget they exist unless they actually committed fraud. Then I'll enjoy the show. Edit 2. Some doubted the 30-day squatter rule. Yes, in most U.S. states, if someone lives in your property more than 30 days with permission, they become legal tenants and you must evict properly. My parents faked permission and lied about the timeline, which is why it took 5 months. Update: 5 days later, I did some digging with family. Turns out my maternal grandfather, who I never met, died 7 months ago and left my mother, a fellow only child, a large inheritance including his house and land. That's where the startup money came from. My parents now live in that house rent-free and apparently won't need to bother me again. My maternal grandparents sound exactly like my parents. Cold, judgmental, divorced alcoholics, so no surprise there. My paternal side, the good grandparents, want nothing to do with them and never helped financially. Nothing illegal was done, just inheritance money legally used. I'm definitely planning to sell my house and move, looking for jobs in Arizona now. I'd rather start fresh far away and never risk them finding me again.